Okay, this is the recording on September 12th, 2025 for ESM 105. All right. Thank you all for making it back again, especially on a Friday morning. It's one of the most difficult times to make it to school, I know, from personal experience. I struggle with it every Friday morning, okay? So here's what we're going to do today. We are good to wrap up this PowerPoint from week 1 through 2 material, okay? Thankfully, the week 3 to 4 PowerPoint that I've made is 59 slides. So realistically, we can get through 59 slides in 3 lectures next week. And I think that when next time I teach this course, I'll probably just make that be a week 1 through 3 PowerPoint. The other one will be a week 4 PowerPoint. Problem solved. Yeah. We might knock out a couple of these topics, but we're going to be finishing up all of our background fundamentals, all right? That will lay the groundwork for discussing ecological principles. So discussing energetic transformations will help us when we're discussing trophic structures, okay, and how energy flows through ecosystems. I hope. All right, let's take a look where we're at the place where we got. So we finished on Wednesday talking about organic compounds. And what are organic compounds? Organic compounds are carbon-based molecules, okay? Carbon-based molecules will usually have, a few specific functional groups attached to a larger carbon skeleton that give the molecule its specialized function. The 4 major categories of organic compounds that you're going to be dealing with, in ecology, in biology, and all these things, are the lipids, okay, or the fats, oils, waxes, hydrophobic solutions, water-fearing solutions, okay? They're made up of non-polar bonds, so they won't interact with polar solutions like water, all right? It's incredibly important, okay? This idea of hydrophobicity and hydrophilicity. So for example, plants and animals that have water-repellent coatings on them that, say, are meant to prevent pathogens from being able to settle on their surfaces too long, or that allow aquatic animals to float and stay on the surface of water by repelling water, not getting waterlogged. These are made up of hydrophobic lipid molecules, all right? Carbohydrates are the sugars. They look like this, okay? The proteins are made up of amino acids. They're a big source of nitrogen, one of the main reasons that you need nitrogen in such high amounts, and one of the reasons that the introduction of nitrogen fertilizers was so important in increasing crop productivity in the United States, right, was the need for nitrogen in amino acids in proteins. We will talk about that green revolution where chemical fertilizers started to become more understood. We figured out how to get massive amounts of nitrogen into ecosystems and then lead to their collapse. It'll be very exciting. So let's see what else we have here. Nucleic acids make up the DNA and the RNA. All right, big molecules, biological macromolecules, important categories of organic compounds that you should be aware of. Now we can talk about cells. All right, the cell is considered as the primary unit of life. Every living thing is made up of one or more cells. What do cells do? Cells create order. How do cells create order? Well, what do I mean when I say that is a better statement instead of how do they do it? What do I mean when I say that? A cell has a membrane that sets up a boundary. The boundary allows conditions within the cell to be different than conditions outside of the cell. That is order, all right? This membrane means that you can have certain chemical reactions occurring within the cell that aren't occurring outside of the cell. And then within the cell, you can have additional subcompartments where specific reactions are carried out at specific rates, all right? And this allows a lot of regulation and efficiency, okay? Buttons. Where am I? I can't find my damn buttons. All right. there. Okay, so all of these cells, all right, set up this division using these special structures called phospholipid bilayers, each one of these being a phospholipid bilayer, or sometimes two phospholipid bilayers, okay? And the reason phospholipid bilayers do anything is they are hydrophobic, or they have a hydrophobic region. So I'm gonna go boop, zoom, zoom, magnified. Incredible, look how I've done this. So when you're looking at a membrane, you've got all of these individual molecules called phospholipids. I guess get lazier and lazier, it's fine. All right. They have a hydrophobic region and they have hydrophilic regions. So when they're in an aqueous solution, they auto-assemble into these sheets of hydrophobicity, basically. Now, the inside of the cell, the outside of the cell is water-based, right? It's aqueous. So things that are soluble inside the cell or outside of the cell cannot really freely cross the phospholipid bilayer because this region right here is hydrophobic. So it's actually, unfortunately, it's not that good at repelling water, so that's like confusing, all right? But it's good at repelling things that are soluble in water, all right? The key thing here is that the cell compartmentalizes reactions, okay? The cell makes its interior different than the fluid it's floating in. And then it sets up compartments inside of itself where it can have specialized chemical reactions, okay? You can concentrate certain enzymes. It's all very, very important. Oh, look. John, illustrate the phospholipid bilayer on the board. Explain hydrophobicity and hydrophilicity. Look at that. All right. Great. So I know we've talked about it a lot, but remember when we were talking about the water molecule and how there's a difference in the electronegativity between oxygen and hydrogen, which makes the molecule itself like a polar molecule? So water is a polar solution. Like dissolves like. Polar molecules will dissolve into the solution, all right? But they won't freely cross the membranes here. It's really important. How do we feel so far? How are we doing? Question, please.
Is there more to the phospholipid bilayer that gives animal cells their structure? Like, I'm imagining like putting like oil on my skin and like emulsify
Yeah,
everything on my body.
absolutely. So there's more that gives the actual cell membrane structure in that there are proteins and there's something called the extracellular matrix, which is a big network of things like collagen and other stuff like that that's anchored, the cell membrane's all anchored to. And then you'll have special cell types on your skin specifically that just become like, yeah, hard and dead and just like won't let, it's designed to not let things through. Yeah, no problem. But it's something to consider when you're thinking about, say, exposure to chemicals. There are certain chemicals, like DMSO is a really big one, and what it does is it helps things permeate membranes. And so you'll use it when you're trying to get something to dissolve into, something that's hydrophobic to dissolve into water, or something that's hydrophilic to dissolve into oils, something like that, right? So you add DMSO to all sorts of chemicals in the lab, but then if you spill something full of DMSO onto your body, it goes and just like moves right into you really aggressively. So, you know, it's good to be aware of this. Like, what's protecting you? It's a small sheet of essentially oil. All right. Great. So yeah, surrounded by a lipid membrane controlling flow of materials. The interior is then subdivided. Here are some different subcellular, like here are some organelles. Subcellular organelles is repetitive, is redundant. All right. Here's a leaf. You cut into the leaf. The leaf has a bunch of different cell types. All right. You don't need to worry about the different, like the mesophyll, the cuticle, the bundles, the bundle sheaths. You don't need to be too familiar with all that. Underneath here, you've got the cell. Its structure supported by a cell wall made of cellulose. There's the membrane. It's got a nucleus that contains genetic material. Chloroplasts serving as the sites of photosynthesis. Mitochondria serving as the sites of cellular respiration. And a central vacuole, which has multiple purposes, including storage of ions and also generating internal turgor pressure to help the cell stay stable. Now, do you have any questions about the cell? Because, unfortunately, I would love to talk about the cell for the next 2 weeks. Unless there are any questions, that's going to be your cell talk. Yeah.
Are we going to go into chloroplastics metabolism? Like how it processes sunlight?
Not really. Which I'm really bummed about. Yeah, no. I just did in plant ecology. I just did 2 weeks on photosynthesis, and it was a ton of fun. But yeah, looking at how much we have to cover for this course, it just seems like something for botany course or a bio course. Yeah. All right, enzymes, metabolism. What is metabolism? Metabolism is all of the chemical reactions occurring within blank, occurring within the system, right? So if you're talking about the cell level, the cell has a metabolism, all the reactions occurring within the cell. If you're talking about an organism, it has a metabolism, all the reactions occurring within the organism. And these metabolic reactions are facilitated by enzymes. So by having different enzymes in different segments of the cell, you can have different metabolic reactions going on in different portions of the cell. You can do a bunch of chloroplast, a bunch of photosynthesis in the chloroplasts, and a bunch of respiration in the mitochondria, rather than doing all of these processes everywhere within the cell. Question?
I have probably a misunderstanding of the difference between enzymes and proteins. I was taught that they're fundamentally different.
No, they are the same. Enzymes are a class of proteins. Enzymes are protein catalysts. Yeah, that's the way to think about them. Absolutely. Yes. It's always great to correct a misconception. Okay, let's keep on going. Energy. All right, you know that we're going to be talking about energetic transformations. All righty. We've already talked about state variables and things changing their state of matter, and then energy moving through ecosystems, right? So what is energy? We'll just discuss it briefly here. I've always hated this definition, even all the way since I was like a student, an undergraduate student. I was like, energy can do work. And it's like, okay, cool. Oh, no, don't worry about it. Energy, it just means that energy can just do something. Like energy can move something, or energy can cause something to change its shape. Energy can do work, all right? I don't know why it's such a frustrating definition, but that's the definition that we use, and it does, the problem is, the definition does work, it just doesn't feel very satisfying. You know what I mean? Yeah, there's just so much variability. Energy can do so many things, And most of the time it's like moving something on a subcellular level, or on a very, very small scale. It's moving something by like making an electron go up. That's work, It's all, very annoying. But it'll work for our understandings here. We got some different types of energy. Kinetic energy is energy of moving objects. We already talked, remember, about temperature as a measure of the kinetic energy within a substance. Like this table, its temperature is determined by how much kinetic energy the molecules making it up have. And if the kinetic energy of the molecules making up this table gets too high, then the table will melt and change from a solid to a liquid because the intermolecular bonds start to break because they have so much energy to move around. And that's what temperature's measuring, okay? Y'all like this? All the little particles moving? It's fun. Potential energy is stored energy. Chemical energy is potential energy stored in chemical bonds. So when you see a larger molecule. Every time a bond is broken, that's a potential to have energy was going to be released. It's a potential for energy to be harvested to do some work somewhere else. All right? So potential energy also includes things like potential energy of position, you know? Like, look, so this is so dry. I go over here and I expend some energy to lift up the water bottle. Now there's energy stored, potential energy, in its position. So I had all this chemical energy in my body and ATP molecules, this potential energy, potential chemical energy. I break some ATP molecules, I release the energy, and watch, kinetic energy! And now it stops, and now it's stored potential energy based on position, and then it can drop and it could do work, it could do something. I could break up on something else, like if I dropped it on this, it breaks other bonds, you know? Anyways. That's the energetics talk. And of course, remember, second law of thermodynamics, energy is never created nor destroyed, it just changes forms. Are we comfortable with all that? Okay. And then heat, all right? This is all of the stuff that I talked about with temperature that I've been, so excited to discuss. I just love it. This here is a visualization for Bayesian motion. So when you talk about a substance where the molecules are not at 0 degrees Kelvin, right? The molecules are moving around. And the movement of molecules is entirely random. And someday that will matter probably to you when you're talking about, say, the rate of enzyme-catalyzed reactions or something like that. It's important that there's no directionality to the movement of the molecules of water in a pure solution of water. They randomly are scattering around. And I also just like this image. I don't know. Look at how it tracks the movement. Oh, they go all over the place. Okay, cool. Thermodynamics. Sound good? Let's talk about them. The first law of thermodynamics is that energy is neither created nor destroyed. The second is that every time the energy changes forms, there's a lost bit of wasted energy as heat. Doy. How long have you been doing this, John? How long have you been doing this? Okay, remember when we talked about open versus closed systems? All right, okay? So if you want to build up high energy molecules, like the high energy molecules that give you all of your structure, you need an energy source to do that. Plants can do it using the sun as an energy source. We do it by using the things that eat the plants as well as by eating the plants ourselves. They're high energy molecules, okay? Energy just changes forms. It shifts between kinetic and potential energies over and over again. And every time there's a shift in energy types, some energy is lost as heat. That's why a closed system isn't sustainable, because every time something gets built up or broken down, a little bit of the energy held in that structure just goes out into the atmosphere, just goes into the environment and just radiates away and makes some molecules like move a little bit, but then it all just dissipates. So eventually closed systems always will run down to a stable energy state, because every transformation following the second law of thermodynamics, some energy is lost, all right, as heat. Entropy. Entropy is a really cool way to discuss energetics. It's cool. It's hip. It's the hottest thing out there right now, is talking about entropy. So we can talk about like energy levels, and there are things when you're discussing a chemical reaction, you'll often talk about like how much energy gets released from this reaction that's available to do work, or how much Gibbs free energy does a molecule have in it, or does an object have in it in order to do work. And these are all measurements of how much energy something has. But also, it's just as helpful to talk about entropy. Entropy is a measurement of disorder, okay? Order from disorder is impossible without, order from disorder is impossible. something needs to be falling down towards disorder, releasing energy that then is used somewhere else to bring things up into order. All right? So there's a bunch of order falling towards disorder, and as the net overall system falls closer and closer to a high entropy state, there are little pockets where we're using those energy transfers to to fight against entropy. So we don't need the big concepts. Let's talk about how it works on a smaller scale. All right? I'm going to use the Jenga tower example. All right? Imagine, if you will, come with me to the theater of the mind. All right? Here we are. I now have a pile of Jenga blocks before me. I know. Whoa. I begin stacking them. Oh, he's going so fast. Oh, how does he do it? And the pile's very high. And I go, whoo, I just burned a lot of energy in order to fight against disorder and generate order. Okay? So now this Jenga tower has order to it, and it has energy stored in it. So molecules with low entropy, right, or system states that have low entropy, they have a bunch of energy stored in them. And you would know there was energy stored in this when I come by and I go, bah! And all the blocks fall down, and they clatter, and they make all these noise, and they make waves shoot out at you that your ears detect. And you go, oh, all that noise, all that racket. All right? That energy could be released. So it took energy to fight against disorder, to reduce the level of entropy. And when I allowed the entropy to go back up by just initiating the thing falling over, all the energy got released. All right? Entropy. It's really cool. It's really fun to think about, you know? Think about states. Textbooks love to be like, think about your dorm room. If you leave it alone, it becomes disordered. And then if you put in energy, it can become ordered. And it's like, great. I don't know. I don't know why that textbook example, I've seen it in like 3 different textbooks, and it's always just like, okay, yep, everybody's a dang slob, I guess. All right. So, what were we doing? Energetics. I showed you this image previously for a demonstration of the redox reactions, right? But this is our big bioenergetic equation, all right? These are the most important energetic transformations on the globe that you need to be aware of. So let's look at them now through the lens of entropy. Check this out. Carbon dioxide and water. Small molecules, not especially ordered, okay? Pretty high entropy level in these 2 molecules. Not a lot of energy there, okay? If I'm running around and I'm punching a big pile of water, I'm never going to get it to light on fire, all right? Whereas if I punch a bag of sugar, it'll burst into flames, you see. This is the power that I hold within me. Same thing with carbon dioxide. Let's be more realistic about it. I take a lighter out of my pocket and I hold it up in a bunch of carbon dioxide. You know, it's all around me. You've lit a lighter before. You have water in the air. It doesn't just go, okay? There's not a ton of energy held within it. But sugar, you can get sugar burning with so much energy held in it, all right? It's a lower entropy molecule. So, higher entropy state, more disorder. Input energy, lower entropy state, okay? Energy is held in the glucose molecule. Break it down back to the higher entropy state. Energy gets released. And you use it to make ATP. Cool? And then every time energy transformation happens, some is lost as heat due to inefficiencies within the system. How does this all feel for people? Okay? Cool. The initial, we talk about organisms. Well, I've got it in the ecology PowerPoint that's coming up next. We'll talk about things like primary producers, organisms that initiate, that produce the first high energy organic molecules that then can be broken down by other organisms, okay? These primary producers are usually considered as photosynthetic organisms. So where is it right here? Oh yeah, it's going to come up right here. Okay, so it's usually photosynthetic organisms. There are exceptions to this. There are species that exist in areas where there is no light. All right, and there needs to be an initial generation of high energy organic molecules. Oftentimes, this is accomplished by chemosynthesis, where organisms can break down a certain molecule in order to start the production of high energy organic molecules. It's all very interesting. It's easy to think about, there's autotrophs and heterotrophs, right? Autotrophs are self-eaters. They make their own food. Heterotrophs are other eaters. They have to eat other food sources. But really, there are many, many categories besides just those two, like the chemoautotrophs and the chemoheterotrophs and the photoautotrophs and the mixotrophs and the thermoautotrophs and the it's like there's a whole thing, a whole sheet for these things. And it's usually taught in like a bacteriology course, yes?
So would the universal ancestor be a chemoautotroph? The first little cell on the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I see what you mean. It's the really frustrating thing. It's like, there's no way to know, right? There's absolutely just no way to know. But it's fun to think about, like, would that be what evolved, or would it be like where the question is, when the molecules of RNA began recruiting helpers to make proteins, did that float or did that sink in the water? Was there sunlight? What was the energy source? You know, it's just very interesting.
It's crazy to think about how many times random molecules assembled and how many times that failed before they were able to reproduce.
Absolutely, like the stage of chemical evolution is probably like one of the most interesting things to think about. It makes you want to be a chemist, and then you take OChem. At least that's my story, and I go, I actually don't like this. All right, cool. So these are like the exceptions right here. When we're talking about energetics, we're usually talking about terrestrial, even if it's aquatic energetics. We're usually talking about phototrophs, photoautotrophs, as the initial creators of high energy organic molecules. So energy from the sun, solar energy, what does it provide? It maintains a certain temperature range. That's great. It allows for photosynthesis to occur. So photosynthesis does not only occur in plants. There are other organisms capable of carrying out photosynthesis. All right. But I didn't know when I was making this PowerPoint, I didn't know how basic I was going to be with everything. And now that I'm standing in front of you all, I don't feel comfortable being like, in plants it's photosynthesis. And then there's, so I'm going to try to keep it reasonably brief without just skipping over huge important concepts. All right? I don't want to misinform you. So there are many organisms that can carry out photosynthesis. We usually think about them as like plants. So in your mind, you can envision there's a plant, the small plant grows, gets sunlight, animal eats the plant, boom, you've got high energy organic molecules there, energy conversion with the consumption, okay? Solar radiation, light as radiation. So what is light? It's electromagnetic radiation, okay? Visible light is radiation that we've evolved to be able to detect with our eyes. It falls here in this certain region of the electromagnetic spectrum, okay? So light is the same as microwaves or X-rays, but it's just a certain energy level of radiation that we've evolved to be able to see. And plants have evolved to harness certain portions of the visible light spectrum, all right, the visible light spectrum for driving photosynthesis. Essentially, they've got these pigments that get blasted with radiation, and they absorb certain wavelengths, and they go, and then they all are in proximity, and they go, and they kick an electron up to a high energy state, and then as it falls to a low energy state, they use that to generate sugars. Okay? Very basic, but it's exciting. Okay. Yeah, there's an excess of energy hitting the planet. Solar radiation, it's a whole promise of like solar panels. If there's so much energy, how can we harvest more of it? Well, then what do we do with it if we have a super efficient solar panel? We'll talk about that in our section on sustainable building. It'll be very interesting. Okay, the photosynthesis equation is right here. Water, carbon dioxide, and solar energy combine to make glucose and oxygen. This is in stoichiometric balance, okay? So the carbon in sugars, in those organic molecules, those high-energy organic molecules, the carbon comes from CO2, all right? The oxygen, okay, comes from, the oxygen comes from, we're just gonna focus on the carbon, because it comes from, I think, both of these molecules, but CO2 mainly. Anyways, so the hydrogen can come from the water and from the ambient solution, right? The key thing is where the carbon comes from. That's the most important thing here. So the carbon comes from CO2, which means that when a plant carries out photosynthesis, it sequesters some carbon from the atmosphere into a stable form. Now, when plants carry out photosynthesis, they don't only make glucose. What they actually do is make this intermediate 3-carbon molecule called G3P, which then leaves that cyclical process that's going on, the Calvin cycle, and goes and blasts off into like 10 different metabolic pathways that then also branch. So when plants carry out photosynthesis, they take CO2 from the atmosphere and they fix that carbon into those biological macromolecules that we talked about, the organic molecules. And that's the process of carbon sequestration, okay? Now, glucose is important, and usually it's taught as, photosynthesis makes glucose. Glucose is the basic energy source for the life on the planet. So plants take solar radiation, they make high-energy organic molecules, which then can be broken down to release energy. Questions about that? Cool. So carbon sequestration, all right, is a big buzzword. It's very important, and this is what it actually